Welcome to Mosaic. I'm your host, Susan Schulman-Pertnoy. Mosaic is Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County's weekly news magazine exploring the most critical issues facing Jews here and around the world. The idea of being either pro or anti-Israel has become increasingly divisive, with many seeing anti-Zionism as the newest form of antisemitism. Today, award-winning historian, author, and activist Gil Troy gives us a look into the Anti-Zionist movement and tells us how we can stand against it. We'll be right back with Mosaic.
You are the book that lights the spark and the hand that passes the torch, the fuel that powers the change that betters the world, across town, across oceans, the hand that soothes the spirit that survived the unthinkable. You are there in the darkest of times to strengthen our community.
Good Greek moving and storage. Your superhero movers.
More moving horror stories. Think it's a good idea for your friends to show up with pizza and beer to help you move? Wrong. Amateurs.
Is there a real mover out there?
As a former police officer, I've heard all of the moving horror stories. But you can trust me and my pros, and we'll have you saying,
Opa!
Call Star Greek.
Good Greek moving and storage. Your superhero movers.
Did you know that Mosaic is 100% supported by community members like you? Contribute now to empower us to keep bringing Mosaic to our community. Email mosaic@jewishpalmbeach.org or call 561-242-6646 to let us know that we can count on your support. Special thanks goes to these generous individuals and corporate partners who have supported the show this season.
The Live-In Palace at Morse Life is leasing luxury residences for ages 65 plus, offering more than first-class amenities and white glove service. Life at the Palace is like life aboard a luxury cruise ship with more things to enjoy life now. More fabulous food, more fun, more friends, more family, more freedom, more future. Morse Life is more life. Live it at the Palace. Start your fabulous future now. Call 561-537-3402.
Joining us today is author and distinguished scholar of North American history at McGill University and an ardent Zionist, Gil Troy. Welcome to Mosaic.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
We have a very diverse viewing audience, so let's start with the basics. What is Zionism?
Zionism is Jewish nationalism. And we have to start with the notion that, first of all, the Jews are a people, not just a religion. I always say that Judaism is like an Oreo cookie. Just like the Oreo cookie has the cookie part and the cream part, and that's what makes it the Oreo cookie. It's the most popular cookie in the world. I look it up on the internet, and everything on the internet is true. And so Judaism combines nation and religion. Think of the holiday of Passover. Is it a religious moment or a moment when we became a people because we had our freedom? The answer is yes, both. The Oreo cookie. When you think about the Western Wall, is it a national symbol of our rise and fall and rise again, or a religious redemption moment? It's both. And so that starts two ideas. One, nationalism can be very good. I, as an American historian, can't explain the miracle of America without talking about nationalism. And I can't explain the miracle of Jewish revival without talking about Jewish nationalism. So Zionism is the Jewish movement of national liberation that says, A, we are a people, B, we have ties to a particular homeland, and C, like 191 other countries in the world today, we have rights to establish a state. In Hebrew, it would be Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel.
You know, I know you use the term nationalism in a very positive light, but in the States right now, the term is toxic.
Yes.
So how do you turn toxic nationalism into healthy nationalism?
This is our work as educators, and I don't care where you stand on Donald Trump, left, right. When Donald Trump gets up in 2018 and says, I am a nationalist, say it, and he puts his golden T on the word nationalism, my liberal friends say, okay, so I'm not a nationalist. And I say, we can't afford to give up that term, because there are different kinds of nationalisms. There's white nationalism, there's liberal nationalism, there's Jewish nationalism, there's a different, and we have to make sure that we bring out the most constructive form of nationalism. Nationalism ultimately says that we, the people of the United States of America, we, the people who happen to be Jewish, we, the people who are British, Spanish, French, have some kind of tie, and we're going to take that tie and express it politically. And we can do it for good or we can do it for bad. Democratic nationalism is not about building walls. It's about opening hearts and minds and linking together. And I think it's essential that we have this conversation, again, in the United States and in Israel, and about Zionism. When we get to college campuses, and we can get to that later, we're not going to win the argument about Israel or win the argument about Zionism until first we get to the notion that there are different forms of nationalisms, and nationalism can be constructive and open and liberal. In fact, there's a fascinating book by a woman named Yuli Tamir who said, as a left-winger, she says, how can I convince a billionaire to give up money for the greater good? I can hope that maybe he or she loves humanity, but she says the cross-class appeal you make, help their country, right, is a nationalist idea. How did we win World War II? A nationalist idea. How did we launch the space initiative? Nationalist idea. How did we create all men are created equal? These magical words that started very, very narrow, only being white men with property, to include women, African Americans, broader and broader and broader, only through Abraham Lincoln nationalism, George Washington nationalism, Martin Luther King nationalism, Betty Friedan nationalism. And so Zionism is an expression of that broad, expansive liberal nationalism, which I think can help solve one of the problems of today, which is people are missing connection. More and more people tell us how lonely they are, how broken they feel, how they miss something in their souls. And if we can agree to agree, and occasionally agree to disagree, and work together, then we can build something constructive. And that's been the magic of the last 250 years in democracies like the United States, like the United Kingdom, and in the last 72 years in this magical place called Israel.
So how do you advocate for constructive liberal nationalism in Israel?
So it's an issue in Israel too, because what often happens in Israel, especially because Israel's surrounded by enemies and surrounded by people who genuinely hate us, and there's a pressing national security issue day to day, it's very easy for that nationalism to turn toxic. It's very easy to get into a politics of I'm great and everybody else is terrible, or even turn Zionism itself into simply being anti-Semitism. And one of my challenges, both when I travel around in the US and in Israel, is to say, no, Zionism has to have a positive vision. And so in Israel, when there are candidates who get up and speak in disgusting ways about Israeli Arabs, I'm among the first to say that's not acceptable. When there are these awful phenomenon of price tag attacks, where some thugs and goons go into Arab villages and slash tires after there's been an act of terrorism against Jews, people like me are out there protesting. And people say, oh, don't talk about the dirty linen, don't talk about terrible things. What country is perfect? If I built my Zionism, if I built my Jewish nationalism, if I built my Americanism on the assumption that the country is perfect, I'd fail.
Right.
Nationalism is the platform that helps us perfect the country. And the beautiful thing, I can say we about America, Canada, and Israel. I've lived in all countries and paid taxes in all three countries. Canada is a beautiful country, but it's about peace, order, good government. It's about a very kind of static, passive nationalism. American nationalism, Jewish nationalism, Zionism is more aspirational, always reaching, always dreaming. I have a dream. I don't just have a problem. And I have a way to do that by working a way to solve the problem by working together and letting that dream unite us.
I want to hear more about that, but we have to take our first break.
Sure.
We'll be right back after this brief message. Coming up, more with activist Gil Troy on anti-Zionism as the new antisemitism.
You are the book that lights the spark and the hand that passes the torch, the fuel that powers the change that betters the world, across town, across oceans, the hand that soothes the spirit that survived the unthinkable. You are there in the darkest of times, to strengthen our community.
Eat, drink, and enjoy Shabbat services at Temple Bethel's Friday night happenings. Cocktail reception and kosher dinner at 5:30, followed by our creative, musically driven Shabbat service. Traditional to progressive, the food and music change every Friday, and you'll want to stay for complimentary dessert.
Plan to spend the whole evening here, and you'll walk away and you'll say, wow, we're coming back next week. Welcome. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat services at Temple Bethel, open to everyone. Join us every Friday night.
Good Greek moving and storage. Your superhero movers.
More moving horror stories. Slick salesman makes you a great deal. Sleazy movers hold everything hostage until you pay a higher fee.
Is there an honest mover out there?
As a former police officer, I've heard all of the moving horror stories. But you can trust me and my pros, and we'll have you saying,
Opa!
call Star Greek.
Good Greek moving and storage. Your superhero movers.
We're back with Professor Gil Troy. You recently wrote a book called The Zionist Ideas. Show everybody. It's an updated version of Arthur Hertzberg's 1959 book, The Zionist Idea. Why did you write the book?
The Zionist idea, when it came out in 1959, I wasn't born yet, but when it came out, was the Zionist Bible. This was the book that took all the crazy ideas of A.D. Gordon and Ahad Ha'am and Herzl and Jabotinsky, these people who imagined a state in the 1880s and the 1900s and the 1920s, and by 1948 created a state. And growing up in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, people would read the book back and forward just to kind of get what were the ideas that made this amazing thing called Israel. I would never had the nerve to update the Zionist Bible, but I was given this tremendous opportunity by the Jewish Publication Society, and I made 3 moves. 1, from the Zionist idea to the Zionist ideas. Open it up from left to right, religious, non-religious. The message being that we have a big, broad platform. We're like Abraham's tent, open on all sides, but also defined. We have our red lines. And also I like the S because it's kind of like a question mark. And too often when people talk about Zionism in Israel, they go to the exclamation mark. And I want to open up and get people thinking and struggling with core questions of who am I and my search for meaning in life. The second was a more historical move. I organized it historically. So you start with the founders, those crazy pioneers who dreamed the state.
Right.
And that's the first third of the book. And then the builders, David Ben-Gurion, Golda Meir, Natan Sharansky, Elie Wiesel, Yitzhak Blue Greenberg, people both in Israel and all over the world who helped create this amazing thing called Israel the next 50 years. And then who are we today? We're the torchbearers, because we're the heirs to this amazing conversation. And a torchbearer can maybe go to an alternate energy source, but also has to think, how do I keep it going for the next generation? And then the third thing was to bring it into different schools of Zionist thought. And there also the idea was to invite people in, find your way through political Zionism or socialist Zionism, religious Zionism, different ways. So we realized that Zionism isn't either or. It's a broad conversation that really gets to core questions about what nationalism is and what it can mean to us.
Can you talk a little bit about the 6 types of Zionism that's
Sure.
referenced in your book?
So I have a fancy title, I'm a professor, I have a PhD and all that, but at the end of the day, I learned from my core educators at Jewish summer camp in Camp Tel Yehuda. We had this very charismatic educator named Mel Riesfield. And he was a Bronx boy, so we didn't have his Oz. And he would say things as we got to learn about Zionism. Okay, we need a black beard, we need a white beard, we need a hoe, we need a wheel. And we go, okay, Mel's off his raka. What was going on was actually a brilliant insight that decades later I used to organize this book. The Blackbeard, Theodor Herzl, Political Zionism. Jews are a people, ties to a homeland, rights to a state. Then a hoe is for socialist Zionism. And whether you're a socialist or not, the notion was that the Zionists didn't say, oh, I have my Jewish side of things and my normal side of things, but I link them together and create something like the kibbutz, an experiment in Jewish socialism. Then the white beard was the religious Zionists, Rav Kook, who said this comes from the Bible, and I respect these chalutzim, these pioneers who are working with their hands, because we're all in this together. And then we would make a fist for revisionist Zionism, for Jabotinsky Zionism, for the Zionism that ultimately became the Zionism of the Likud party, of Menachem Begin, of Startup Nation, a more capitalist, individualist, liberal, lowercase l Zionism. And what's the wheel? The wheel is cultural Zionism. The notion that in the center will be Israel and there'll be a national resurgence of ideas and song and dance, but it'll spread forth like spokes on the wheel to Palm Beach, to Miami, to Montreal, to Mexico, throughout the world. And those are the 5 main schools of Zionist ideology that I learned back then. And I added a 6th school of Zionist ideology, diaspora Zionism. Because there's a conversation going on in Israel about how do we internally build and get rebuilt. But there's also a really important conversation about the partnership between Jews all over the world who, yes, they've contributed their money, but more than that, they've contributed their souls and their aspirations and have gotten tremendous things back. They've gotten inspiration. They've gotten pride. They've gotten a sense of a story that's bigger than last week's sale at the mall or last week's YouTube video of some cat rolling around or some baby drooling. They've gotten a sense of meaning, a sense of significance, a sense of history. And that's what we're all looking for as human beings. And so the Zionist idea is a way of saying, okay, core Zionist idea, we're people, land, state. The Zionist ideas invites us in to say, okay, what kind of meaning do I get from being a part of this great adventure, and how can I help?
Very profound.
So,
what does American Zionism look like today?
So, you know those awful light bulb jokes, which were, how many gurus does it take to change a light bulb? You can trust your inner light. And how many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? You can only change if you want to change. And how many men does it take to change a light bulb? One, he holds it and thinks the whole world revolves around him. And how many feminists does it take? That's not funny, right? Right. How many Zionists does it take to screw in a light bulb? 5 went to screw in a light bulb. 2 to march around going, oh my goodness, look, we've returned to the land, we're returning to power, returning to history. That's 1, 2, 3. The 4th to write the check, and the 5th to complain about media coverage. Once upon a time, American Zionism was only that. But my notion is what I call identity Zionism. My notion is, yes, it's very important to be generous. Yes, it's very important to complain when there are attacks. But I don't want Zionism to just be anti-Semitism. I want American Zionism and British Zionism and Canadian Zionism to be about the search for meaning. And John Kennedy famously said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. I'm asking the question, what can your country do for you? What can sitting right here in Florida, in New York, in Canada, what can having that country there do for us in our search for meaning, in our search for community, in a search for a sense of mission? And I think by doing that, we get a sense of, wow, life is more than just shopping. Life is more than just driving fancy cars. Life is more than just having big houses. Oh, those are all good and fun. But it's also about meaning, about giving back. And when you give back, of course, we know you get so much more.
Thank you for that explanation. We have to take our final break.
Sure.
We'll be right back after this brief message. Coming up, activist Gil Troy tells us what Zionism means in the 21st century.
Picture living aboard a luxury cruise ship with first-class service and the best amenities 24/7. Life at Tradition is just like a cruise ship that doesn't leave port. With more fabulous food, more fun with friends and family, a more fulfilling future, more care when you need it, and more freedom when you don't. Our elegant assisted living residences provide so much more, so you can make the most of every day. Rent an apartment at Morse Life and see how much more life can be.
Did you know that Mosaic is 100% supported by community members like you? Contribute now to empower us to keep bringing Mosaic to our community. Email mosaic@jewishpalmbeach.org or call 561-242-6646 to let us know that we can count on your support.
What's the best kept secret in new cars? It's that you can get a brand new Mini at Braman Mini Palm Beach for under $21,000, which includes free maintenance for 3 years. No kidding.
Plus, free membership to the Fun Mini Club of South Florida for road trips and autocross, and even more with club room social events.
Mini is more than just driving. It's about having fun with the Bremen Mini community. Learn about Bremen Mini at bremenmini.com. Minis for under $21,000, free maintenance, Mini Club, and Club Bremen benefits. It's a no-brainer. Bremen Mini is the right choice.
We're back speaking with Professor Gil Troy. At what point does the focus on political Zionism become too much and we lose the focus on identity Zionism?
That's an excellent question. This is actually one of the central tensions. It's disturbing to me, and I criticize my friends on the right as much as I criticize my friends on the left. If every conversation about Israel is just about the Palestinian problem, about the headaches, A, it's not fun. B, we miss many of the dimensions of Israel. And my friends on the right sometimes are too defensive. And so I'm suffocating because I'm not getting the air that we need, the healthy self-criticism, the thoughtfulness that's required. My friends on the left go to the opposite extreme, and what they do is they'll take any Israeli imperfection, any Israeli mistake, and countries make mistakes, and use that in what I call delegitimization derby to therefore say, well, Israel did this wrong, therefore it doesn't have the right to exist. No one says that about the United States of America, and it certainly makes its shares of mistakes. No one says it about all the dictatorships in the world, from Pakistan to Sudan to the Palestinians, right?
Right.
But only Israel is singled out and delegitimized. That doesn't pass the smell test. That smells like anti-Semitism. Once upon a time, in the medieval times, they picked on the individual Jew. Now, in modern times, they pick on the collective Jew, the state of Israel. So yes, I'm very engaged in the political fight, but we cannot let our enemies win by making every conversation be about them.
Or let them define us.
Or let them define us. And I learned that from my feminist friends, Take Back the Night. I learned that from my African American friends. I learned it from my gay friends. We've got to have, that's why we have to have this internal conversation too. So identity Zionism is saying, of course I stand strong. Of course I stand tall. Of course I push back, but I don't let that define us. And then I have the deeper conversations. And when I launched this book, I wanted to have Zionist salons. It was the 70th anniversary of the State of Israel. I said, how could we celebrate? What can I, just this little guy, do beyond writing this big book? And I said, if at the end of the year, I've hosted 70 different conversations based on these amazing texts about identity Zionism, about what Israel means to me, I'll feel like a success. We've had over 170 Zionist salons in 6 countries.
Oh my goodness.
Because people feel liberated when you invite them to a conversation about Israel that's not about Bibi and not about the Palestinians and not about BDS, but is about us and our collective responsibility and opportunity to grow and stretch, give back and get, as I was saying earlier. And so I'm encouraging people to have these Zionist salons. Get the book, go on the website, and create a conversation with your closest friends about what Israel can mean to us. Push the headlines aside. And I always say, I'm not afraid of any question. And I say to my students, ask the tough questions, but don't just make it about politics. The United States of America isn't just about the racial tensions. Canada, where I lived for many years, isn't just about the linguistic tensions, and Israel isn't just about the Palestinian tension.
Our federation recently did a comprehensive study, community study on what's the future looks like here, and actually we found out that we are one of the fastest growing Jewish communities in North America. That being said, most of the new households are made up of interfaith families. So how do we make Zionism relevant to them?
So it's a very interesting question, because one of the mistakes that too many rabbis make, even when they convert people, and I know not everybody's intermarried is conversion, but let me give it as an example, is they often convert people into the Jewish religion, but not into the Jewish people. And it goes back to my Oreo cookie thing. Why? Partially because we live in a country that's overwhelmingly Christian, and our Christian brothers and sisters have embraced us so beautifully, and we talk about the Judeo-Christian ideal, so we end up comparing. Christianity is only a religion. And I say that when I host pastors around my Sabbath table in Jerusalem. It's not disrespectful to Christianity.
Right.
Christianity is a religion. Judaism is this Oreo cookie, this mix. And so even with converts, let alone with intermarried couples, we don't do a good enough job explaining that peoplehood dimension. So that's one piece of it. There's really an educational piece of it. But secondly, if we really want to build future generations that care about Israel, just in a very practical way, they have got to get the peoplehood thing, because A, you can't understand why Israel is a democracy and not a theocracy unless you understand the peoplehood piece. It's not just about the religion. But B, you're not going to have that love, that instinctive love, and your kids aren't going to have that instinctive love if you're only looking at Judaism through the religious lens. But most important, once upon a time, and my friend Len Sachs at the Cohen Center in Brandeis has done amazing studies on this.
He did that study.
Oh, okay. So he showed that in the 1950s and the 1960s, if you're old like I am and remember the sitcom Bridget Loves Bernie, usually when Jews intermarried, they were literally marrying out of the faith into a Catholic family, into a Protestant family, into another family that had a very strong faith. These days, because of the secularism that's occurred in the United States, especially in the blue states, especially in places, in cities where Jews are most likely to meet non-Jews and marry non-Jews, it frequently happens that a Jew is marrying someone who calls themselves a nothing, right? And so they are now embracing the Jewish dimension of their identity. And so we have an opportunity to say, hey, this is a something, right? And you go from being a nothing to a something.
We need to exercise that opportunity.
And you know what? It's because we're still a depressed, oppressed people. Even though we live in freedom and splendor in the United States of America, we still have that legacy of Europe. And in Europe, you couldn't missionize because you didn't want to upset what they called the goyim. You didn't want to upset the authorities. Today, we should missionize. Not out of disrespect for anybody else, but we've got a great story, right? We've got the most amazing story, a 3,500-year-old conversation about meaning in life, about community, about finding identity. And by missionizing, you do two things. First of all, you get a sense of ownership, right? The salesman or woman
Absolutely.
really loves his or her product. So our young people, if they missionize, like the Mormons understand this, would just love the product more. They'd learn the product more.
Birthright.
And Birthright, right?
Yes,
Does that.
perfect example.
And the second thing is that by spreading, we're saying, we've got pride now, and we've got power here, and I think everybody talks about all the problems in the United States of America. What most scares me is the soul sickness. What most scares me is how much unhappiness there is. I heard there's a beautiful Federation initiative to fight opioid epidemic, right? The opioid epidemic sometimes starts with physical pain, but it often ends up being about psychic pain. And we have to fight that in a very practical way, but we also have to fight it in an existential way. And bringing people in to these great stories, these great values, these great ideals is essential for our communal life.
That's absolutely true, and I could talk to you about this for hours, but we've run out of time. Oh. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, and let's continue the conversation.
Okay.
Mosaic is brought to you by these generous sponsors and underwriters. Learn how you can support Mosaic by visiting jewishpalmbeach.org/mosaic.